Let me take a deep breath with you, because what we're about to do is not just storytelling. It's time travel. It's walking into the mind of an ancient philosopher, stepping across centuries of belief and doubt, and chasing one of the greatest mysteries ever whispered across human history, the lost world of Atlantis. And here's the strange part. The story of Atlantis doesn't start with explorers, or sailors, or forgotten maps. It starts with a single man, sitting in Athens more than 2,000 years ago, quietly writing a dialogue that he never imagined would ignite a global obsession. A man named Plato. But before we dive into him, let me leave you with a question that has puzzled humanity for ages. What if the greatest mystery of the ancient world was never meant to be taken literally? What if millions spent centuries searching for a place that was born not from geography, but from philosophy? Hold that thought. Because once you step into this story, you won't see Atlantis the same way again. Now, if you love uncovering ancient truths like this, go ahead and subscribe. Trust me, we're going to be exploring worlds that most people don't even know existed. Let's begin. Plato introduces Atlantis in two dialogues, Timaeus and Critias. No maps. No travel logs. Just a simple scene. Socrates talking with his friends about the perfect state. At some point, one of them mentions an old story passed down from Egyptian priests to a famous Athenian statesman named Solon. According to the tale, thousands of years before Athens even existed, there was a magnificent island nation far across the sea, an empire with technology, wealth, and power beyond anything Greece had ever seen. They built grand temples shining with metals unfamiliar to the Greeks. They had armies that stretched across continents. Their kings were said to be descended from Poseidon himself. And their capital? Well, Plato describes it like a dream made out of geometry, rings of land and water, spiraling outward like the ripples of a stone dropped into a calm lake. But here's the twist. This great society becomes corrupt. Pride replaces wisdom. Power replaces justice. And the gods, according to the story, decide they've had enough. In a single terrible night of earthquakes and floods, Atlantis disappears beneath the sea. Gone. Just like that. You might already feel it, the mystery, the drama, the almost cinematic devastation. Plato knew exactly what he was doing. But here's where things get interesting. Plato never says the story is literal. In fact, he hints repeatedly that it's a philosophical allegory, a story created to teach moral lessons about the dangers of arrogance and the fall of nations that lose their virtue. And yet, people didn't treat it like that. Even in ancient times, listeners were already whispering, what if it was real? Socrates nods in the story. Solon supposedly heard it from the Egyptians. And Plato describes Atlantis with such vivid detail that many early readers believed, or at least hoped, that he might be preserving a lost chapter of human history. But not everyone was convinced. Aristotle, Plato's own student, and one of the sharpest minds of all time, shrugged and said, the man who created Atlantis also destroyed it. In other words, Plato invented it, so don't take it seriously. And Strabo, the great geographer, found the whole idea suspicious. If such a powerful civilization had existed, he reasoned, someone besides Plato should have mentioned it. Still, the story refused to die. And this is where the journey becomes fascinating. Because even though most ancient scholars doubted Atlantis, the Neoplatonists, those mystical philosophers who believed Plato wrote in layers, began reading the story with symbolic meaning. They didn't care if Atlantis physically existed. To them, it represented cosmic truths, spiritual decline, and the rise and fall of souls through different ages of the universe. Early Christian thinkers, too, found Atlantis irresistible. They didn't fully believe it, but they tried to reconcile it with their own ideas about the age of the world, sometimes treating it like a kingdom that belonged to some pre-flood world mentioned in the book of Genesis. Imagine that, a pagan myth being threaded into Christian history. And then, the story disappears for almost 1,000 years. The Middle Ages barely touch it. Europe's scholars were focused on scripture, saints, and survival, not lost continents. Atlantis becomes just another dusty reference in old Greek manuscripts that few could even read. But everything changes during the Renaissance. Picture it, a Europe hungry for ancient knowledge. Libraries being rediscovered. Greek being relearned. Manuscripts of Plato arriving in Italy after centuries of silence. Suddenly, scholars read Timaeus and Critias again, and their jaws drop. Could this place actually have existed? Could the world have once held civilizations far older than the Bible suggested? And right at this time, almost like destiny, the world cracks open. Sailors return from across the ocean describing vast new lands, strange people, cities of gold, cultures untouched by European history. And for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the question becomes not was Atlantis real, but was Atlantis America? Think about the mindset. Europe thought it already knew the world. Then suddenly, an entire hemisphere reveals itself. What else might be hidden? Writers, explorers, and thinkers begin proposing connections. Maybe the Aztecs, the Maya, or the Inca were descendants of Atlantis. Maybe the islands of the Caribbean were the last peaks of a sunken continent. Maybe the whole Atlantic Ocean was once home to a mighty empire swallowed by the sea. You can almost feel the excitement of the era, that electric sensation that the world was bigger, older, and stranger than anyone had ever imagined. If this kind of discovery could happen, then Atlantis didn't feel impossible anymore. Now before we go further, if you're enjoying this journey through forgotten history, go ahead and subscribe. It helps us keep exploring stories most channels never touch. Now let's move into the next chapter. By the 19th century, the world had changed again. Science was rising. Archaeology was digging deeper. Geology was mapping the earth. And a man named Ignatius Donnelly, a congressman turned amateur historian, writes one of the most influential books on Atlantis ever published. Donnelly believed Atlantis was not just real, but the mother civilization of the entire world. According to him, the pyramids of Egypt, the temples of the Maya, the myths of the Greeks, even the development of agriculture, all of it came from Atlantis. People loved the idea. It was clean, dramatic, and explained similarities between cultures that scholars were still trying to understand. But of course, Donnelly was wrong. His ideas were built on speculation, coincidence, and flawed assumptions. But they were persuasive, and they shaped the modern myth. Right around this time, occult movements were rising too. Helena Blavatsky, founder of Theosophy, claimed that Atlantis wasn't just a lost civilization but an entire lost race. Edgar Cayce, the sleeping prophet, said Atlantis had advanced technology, flying machines, even crystals that could harness energy, ideas that would later inspire countless TV shows, books, and conspiracy theories. Suddenly, Atlantis wasn't just history. It was mystical, futuristic, almost sci-fi. And the public loved it. But science wasn't convinced. Once oceanography matured in the 20th century, the ocean floor began to reveal its shape.
No sunken continent.
No lost landmass. No geological evidence that anything Plato described ever existed. Archaeology uncovered separate, independent developments of civilization, not one common mother culture. And modern scholars went back to Plato and realized that his timeline, 9,000 years before Solon, wasn't even possible according to what we know about human society at that stage. The conclusion became clear: Atlantis, as a real physical place, almost certainly never existed. Yet the myth lives on stronger than ever. Why? Because Atlantis stopped being a location. It became an idea. A warning about hubris. A reflection on the fragility of civilizations. A reminder that greatness can become corruption, and that even the mightiest societies can fall in a single moment of disaster, whether through natural forces or their own moral decay. Every generation sees itself in Atlantis. When European empires collapsed, Atlantis was used as a symbol. During the Cold War, people imagined advanced powers destroying themselves. In modern times, discussions about climate change, rising seas, and technological arrogance echo the same ancient warning Plato tried to give. And that, I think, is the reason Atlantis will never die. It doesn't matter if the continent was real. What matters is that the lesson is real. The myth survives because it speaks to something deep inside us, our fear of losing what we build, and our hope that somewhere in the past lies a clue to our own future. Stories like this remind us why history matters. It's not just names and dates. It's memory. It's identity. It's the mirror we hold up to ourselves. And if you want to keep exploring hidden chapters like this, the mysteries, the forgotten worlds, the stories that shape civilizations, make sure you subscribe and stay with us. There's so much more ahead. But before we close, let me leave you with a question people have been asking for more than 2,000 years. Was Atlantis a real place lost to time? Or was it a warning we still haven't learned to understand? Maybe Plato didn't give us a map, because he wasn't pointing to the ocean. He was pointing to us. Thank you for listening. Stay curious, stay awake to history, and I'll see you in the next journey.